Hello, and welcome to the Create a Life You Love podcast. I'm your host, Chantal Cox. My purpose is to empower and lift up others who know in their heart they're meant for more. More joy, more impact, and more passion. If you're ready to make a radical transformation and create a life that you love, then you have come to the right place. Let's do this. Hello. Welcome to today's episode of the Create a Life You Love video podcast, where we get to connect with people from all around the world to share tips and strategies designed to help you on your journey. So I am your host, Chantal Cox. I'm an author, speaker, and transformation neuro coach who helps women experiencing life transitions create a new vision for themselves, reconnect with their passion and purpose, and turn their transition into their triumphant transformation. So I am so excited to be here today with Katie Rössler. Katie is an author, a transformative grief guide, and a licensed counselor with 13 years of experience. Her work has led her to serve people in residential facilities, homes, schools, and private practice in 2 countries. She is an expat, wife, and mom of 3 who loves spending her weekends hiking with her family in the mountains. So hello, Katie. How are you today?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. And share with us where you're joining us from.
Yes, I'm joining us from Munich, Germany. So we are a big time difference apart.
Yes. And so anybody watching this in the Facebook group on a Tuesday at 7, this was pre-recorded to accommodate for the time difference, but the same value is going to be here. I'm so excited to hear Katie's story. So Katie, I know you just wrote a book. That's so exciting. And also real quick, before we dive into that, how old are your kids?
So I have a 7-year-old, an almost 5-year-old, and a 10-month-old.
Oh, how fun. Those are great ages. Exciting.
Yeah.
You are busy with that and writing a book and being on podcasts to share your value. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you create a life that you love?
Yeah, so I would say my journey actually began when I reflect in childhood, growing up in a military family and moving every 2 to 3 years. Made me a very adaptable person and one who liked to observe how people were doing things to sort of decide, like, what group will I hang out with and who's doing this and that. And that ultimately is how I ended up becoming a counselor. I started undergrad physics pre-med thinking I'm going to be a doctor, and very quickly realized those were not my people. I was a little too social to like, hey, study group, who's bringing what snacks and this and that. And then I realized that the psychology group was a lot more like me. So I decided to do my master's in counseling and become a marriage and family therapist. And from that, around that time, I did my residency in a residential facility and also working in homes and then working in schools, and it kind of evolved. And I knew that my passion was supporting people in healing and growing. And so all of the work that I did was just focused on giving people tools, because I found that so often with talk therapy, people were getting into the like, just tell your story over and over and over and over, and never like, here are tangible things to do daily or weekly. And I will see you in like a week or 2 to hold you accountable to how that worked. And that was important to me. My parents divorced when I was a teenager, and I recognized that there was such value to going to therapy as a family. And then also, even with my mom, she and I had some struggles because I was 15 and all of this is happening. And my mom was the one we lived with. So it's like I took it out on her. And we needed to have that person, that third person to go, hey, let's talk about what's happening here. And she gave us so many great tools. And it was such a great example for me. And she ended up mentoring me later in life of how to approach supporting people in a way that empowers them as their own healing agent and their own advocate, in a sense, of what they need. So fast forward, I meet my husband. He's German. It was funny because growing up in a military family, we did live in Germany. And I think that's what made me attracted to, like, oh, I know the German culture and I could I could count to 10 in German. That was my like, let me show you what I can do, my party trick. And we fell in love. And about 5 to 6 years after living in the States together, we moved to Germany. And so I had our first daughter already. She was about to be 2, and I was pregnant with our second. And we traveled over here, and it was a dream. I think a lot of American women, we have this like, oh, live in Europe, oh, that would just be amazing, right? And this like, it's so romantic, especially in like Munich in the city with Marienplatz and all this stuff. And then when you decide to like really start a life in a country, it's very different. And it took a couple years before that part sunk in, because there's still the beauty of like, there's castles down the road, like by my children's school. It's like, oh my gosh. So we go along this journey. My husband struggles with being back in his home country, and it's called reverse culture shock, when you go back and you're like, I just don't belong here anymore. And here is his wife who's like, this is wonderful. Everything's new. Again, local castle, the bakery, all these fresh things. And once it sunk in for both of us, like, wow, creating a life in a country, though it was his country, he felt like that fish out of water. And eventually I felt like the fish out of water. You start to say, what is the life that we want to create here? How do we want this to look? Around that time, I started to have some progress in seeing couples here. I decided that the expat community really needed some positive support in the form of therapy for relationships and for families, because people were moving over here just like we had and going like, now in my home country, I would have done this role. I would have done the paperwork and the health insurance and all this. And now you have to do it because you know the language better than me. And all of these things were causing arguments and problems. And I was a part of these really beautiful Facebook groups of women who were just asking for tools and resources. And so it was a natural fit to say, hey, I'm here. And I started out going into people's homes here, and I'd sit at their dining room table or wherever they wanted, and we would just talk it out. And it was, I can't tell you, it's one of the best things, because it's one thing to be in a therapy office where they're like, and then that pile is always on the dining room table and you haven't cleaned it for weeks. And then to see the pile, like be there, go, that's like 3 sheets of paper. What is it about that? Like it was just this beautiful thing to actually be a part of, because couples got so quickly in their comfort zone with me because they were in their home. And so from there, I switched into having office space and being able to see couples there, and working with individuals. And it was such a blessing to just be that support person, but to have come out of it myself, to have walked that journey of like, this is hard and here's how we adjusted, and then sit with them. And then the end of 2018 came, and I got a call that my mother had died. It was 2:00 in the morning. My brother called, and it was just this shock to the system because she died in her sleep. So it wasn't expected. There were no health issues. There wasn't anything that we were like, oh, this may come. And that was where I think the point in my life where my compass started spinning. I no longer had direction. My mom was like my biggest cheerleader. She'd been there through everything. And we were very, very close. And even my daughters were 4 and 2 at the time. They were used to talking to her every day. And it was just this huge hole in our family's life. And from there, the following year, I just thought like, okay, we always wanted to have a third. So like, okay, even though we're in this time of grief and trauma, let's just try and let's see. But I ended up having 2 miscarriages in 2018. And it just felt like this ocean kept, a big wave knocking me down and then knocking me down. And I remember reflecting after all of that and just being like, okay, in 2020, I don't want anyone to have to say, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry these things are happening to you. Like, I was like, I want to remove that phrase from as much as I love the care and the concern of people, there's a point where like, I'm just tired of hearing it. So I had hoped for that. And I also told my husband, I remember it was January, it was right after the new year. I said, honey, like, I just want to remove urgency from our lives. I need less stress. I just need things to slow down. I needed to go continue my own grief healing journey. And I just needed everything to pause. And then March came, and here in Germany, we were in full lockdown. And it was like, I was like, I'm so sorry, everybody. Like, I just manifested less urgency. And it really happened where we're all stuck at home. And it was such a beautiful time for my family, because it was not running from this place to this place. And it was calm. And it was tough with these young kids. And I got pregnant in that time. And so it was like, whoa. But what came from it was, as I was really doing my own healing work, I had this notebook that I would take outside as the girls were playing, and I just started writing. And there was a point where I was like, this is a book. there are chapters, this isn't just me journaling. And I call it like wildfire. And as you know, when you write a book, there are points where you just have to stop, because it's too emotional. It's you're having to like dig up all of the things. And so I would take pauses and little breaks from it. And then I'd have people go, like, how's that book coming? And I'm like, okay, go back to the book. But as I was doing the work, I was writing about the work, and I was writing about what grief really is. And often we assume that grief is just related to death and loss. And it's so much more than that. And so my book, I titled The New Face of Grief: Transform Pain into Empowerment, because I wanted to start to teach people what I was starting to see, which was grief is like throughout our lives. I mean, I moved throughout my whole life. Every 2 to 3 years, I experienced grief. My parents' divorce, that was grief. I had breakups that I thought this would be the one. That was grief. Moved countries, that was grief. There was grief throughout the whole my whole life, and all of my clients as well. But we weren't calling it grief, because we'd say things to ourselves like, well, nobody died. Like, why am I so emotional about this? Why am I so upset? Why does it feel like it's the end of things? Nobody died. And in reality, there was always a loss. There was always a letting go. There was always a change. And so the book came out of that. Hey, I've had these deaths in my circle, but that's just scratching the surface of grief. And wow, when you really face it and you allow it to transform you, and kind of that metamorphosis, which is uncomfortable and painful, but then you see this other side of what comes of you, it's worth it. It's worth that growth. And so my life of moving around to now having this book out and really starting to teach people as a transformative grief guide how grief really does transform us into this more amazing version of ourselves, and our life into something we would never have imagined if we continue to stay stuck in that victimhood, that mentality that life keeps ocean waves keep hitting me down, versus, hey, I actually have some control over how I'm experiencing this. That journey has really led me to this place I am now. And I can see, 5-10 years from now, where I'm going to continue to take this and help people, as well as go on my own journey.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and being very vulnerable and authentic about things in your life that, do cause grief, and going through the whole process. I think it's so powerful that you were able to change your great grief to empowerment. And then not only that, you didn't just stop there. You're like, how can I use what I've learned to turn back and help others going through the same process? And that is so much about like what we are about in the Create a Life You Love kind of community and Create a Life You Love movement. So thank you so much for sharing that. So now I did have a question. So you mentioned that when you were able to go into couples' homes, their barriers broke down quicker because they were in their own comfortable home setting. And back then that was in person. And so when things did move online, briefly or permanently, did you find that with any of your clients? I'm not sure what you call them, but that because they were in their own home, but like Zooming with you?
So I went from in-home to being in an office space to then online. So I had those different, increments. I would say the ones who were, with me when we were doing like I call it in-home counseling. There was definitely a different level of comfort, and sometimes maybe too comfortable, you know, when we had to switch then to Zoom and being online in 2020. What I noticed was at first it was sort of this like, okay, and I have to look at you, but I have to look at the camera and like that, what am I? And then after maybe one or two of those sessions, it was like, normal. And it was much more relaxed because they were back in their homes again. And it was just like I was just on the coffee table in their home. I'm sitting here. So I found that, yes, it helped them. But I also would say there is some benefit to stepping outside of your home and working on the things you need to, because as much as for me as the therapist, it was good for me to see what people were talking about. For them, being able to step outside of it helps you get a clearer mind. And unfortunately, with online counseling, unless they're doing it from their office space, which sometimes they would, more than likely it's in their homes. And so they're in that space. And as soon as they turn off the Zoom call, they're back to, yelling at the kids about something or making dinner, and it's hard to integrate what you've just learned into then, okay, here's where I'm going to go. So I found that last year's, couples counseling was very intense. I would have 60 or 90-minute sessions that were just, you could tell they had argued right before getting on. Then they argued through and we worked on, what was happening. And I call it kind of translating their communication, like who's saying what, and what do we mean? And how are we saying it? And then you could tell that they were leaving and it was never quite sure, where are we going after that? It's not like they go for a walk to the car afterwards. They're just right there. And if there's a kid who's not asleep or whatever, they're going back into their world. So it was much more challenging, and a big reason why I was happy to take my maternity leave this year and just focus on get this book out and take a break from clients in that way. Because I think, even for those of us who are those way showers and bridge builders, it's emotionally exhausting, and you must be taking care of yourself as you're doing those things, as you're helping other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you started just going outside and writing in a notebook, kind of more in journaling, had you ever wanted to write a book before?
Oh, yes, since I was a teenager, but I assumed it would be, I always thought it would be a 3-generation book with my mom and my grandmother, and that we would write about different experiences in our lives, and things going on in the current society. And then when my mom died, I remember thinking within that like first month or so, well, there goes that book. We can't write that book. And I had already had some other book ideas floating around in my head and written some chapters for some other ideas. But this was the one that really, just like I said, it was just came out really, it flowed quite freely.
That's awesome. So in my mind, because my experience was fairly similar, like that meant like your message had to get out there. Like there is a purpose for it. And it's not just, I want to write a book to say I wrote a book. Like there is like passion and meaning in there. So that is amazing. And so the next question I usually ask is, how do you help others create a life that they love? And so I'm hoping embedded in that answer is some of those tips that you mentioned previously, so that people have some actionable tips and strategies to take away with them.
Yeah. So the biggest way, especially now in the work that I'm doing privately with clients, is helping them to face that grief. Because when we really create a life that we love, if you don't do the personal work, you're just walking into that life with all the baggage still. It's like going into the airport and be like, all the bags on the airplane. Well, that doesn't work. You really have to check them. So it's looking at the false beliefs, the conditioning that we've had since childhood. And I address this in my book, that we weren't really taught how to handle grief. We were told how to numb, escape, and avoid. And I think about parenting now and how quickly I am with my kids to try to help them we call it redirection in the therapy world, but redirect them onto thinking about something else if they're in pain or angry or sad, instead of teaching them in the moment how to cope with those feelings and how to express them. I tell a story that our doctor here, I love him so much, but he, after a shot, gives them a gummy bear. And I'm like, you don't have to give them a gummy bear. It's okay. But this is very normal here. If somebody scrapes their knee in the area or they're throwing a tantrum, the grandparents of the omas will bring them a chocolate or and like, oh, here. And this is just in this culture, and growing up in the American culture, it's just as, like, here's my cell phone, watch this video and think about something else, instead of, let me teach you how to feel this person hurt your feelings, let me teach you how to express that, instead of numbing. So I address with them, what are those false beliefs? How do we start to find the resiliency within us again? And a large part of that is like awareness, writing down, what is our grief response when we're triggered? Is it shopping? Is it eating or drinking certain things? Is it some type of drug? Is it a bad relationship? Is it unhealthy people? Misery loves company. We know that friend that we can call who's just gonna like blah, 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 blah. And how would we like to change that? And so I literally have my clients draw like a circle graph of like, here's the top, here's what triggered me when he said this, and I responded this way. And this is how I'd like to start to shift that. So I highly recommend that, because it's kind of like becoming your own consultant, right? Like, let me step outside of myself. Let me see how my process is, what I do. Okay, how would I like to shift that? And starting to maybe leave little notes on the wall or on your mirror of like, this is how I want to be today. This is how I want to start to respond. And then it's really saying, okay, I need to heal the stuff that makes me get triggered. And that's reflecting on your grief timeline, looking throughout your life and going, were you bullied on the school bus? Those are something your parents said to you or did to you that sticks with you. Is there major trauma? Are there events that occurred that affected your ability to attach to people or trust them? All of that is grief work. And once we kind of see them, it's no longer this feeling of, I always use the description, it's like telling a kid, like, go clean your room. And it's like, they don't know where to begin. Everything's chaos in their room. They've just played. And they don't like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Versus, let's put the books on the bookshelf. Let's make our bed. Let's put the clothes back into, the drawers. And so we need that with grief too. Okay, there are multiple things. Let's look at the theme. Is there a theme of abandonment or a theme of the need for independence and finding your voice, or trust? Okay, so now that we know what those themes are, let's look at each one that seems really painful. And I help people to get out of their heads. We think grief is a thought process thing, right? Like, we know there's emotions, but we think it's all here. But grief is stored in our bodies. And that's why we can try to numb it all out, but then it comes out and either we become really angry and irritated, or we just cry randomly and we don't know where this is coming from. Or we just feel this emptiness and we're not sure, like, why do I just feel like life is just not what I want it to be? And all of that is a sign that your body's going like, Mayday, Mayday. And then we have the sleep problems and the migraines and the, health issues. So our body has been trying to tell us, hey, you've got grief stored in me. Please move it through. And I also work with my clients on tools that work for them. In Eastern cultures and in Africa, they use movement in their grief work. When there's been a loss or a change or a rite of passage, there's dancing, there's music. There are resorts in Thailand that for grief that you get massages because they want to get things flowing. And it's like, I really want that. I want that for our culture, right? Like, I want grief massages, sound wonderful. But there's the realization that talking about it and thinking about it aren't always going to help. But creating that movement, creating art from it, creating music from it are really powerful. So I guide my clients on finding what their comfort is and sometimes pushing them a little bit, because not all of us are comfortable just like dancing randomly in a room. And it's like, just try, just see what it feels like. And then from there, we go into, what does healing look like for them? What does it feel like for them? What is the end goal? Of course, we have the end goal of, creating that life we love and feeling positive and just, and it's the recognition that that butterfly that, was a caterpillar and it has to cocoon first and it has to go through that metamorphosis. And that metamorphosis means, and we go back to science class, it actually, the enzymes make it turn into mush in the cocoon. That's why it needs the cocoon. And then all of a sudden a hormone shifts and another enzyme is released and platelets start to form to create the wings and the legs. And if the cocoon opens too fast, we only have one wing and one leg and we're not going anywhere. So we have to allow time and space for this. And that is not part of our culture society. It's like, go back to work. You did this, go back. I mean, even in motherhood, like you had a baby, you have a couple weeks, go, now go back to work. We're not in the, hey, this takes time and that's okay. You don't have to rush it. And it's not an everyday, it spills on everything. So I highly recommend clients journaling and allotting time, 15, 20 minutes. That's like, this is my time to grieve, to feel, to write, to create. And when they do that, they find that each day their bodies and minds are able to wait for that amount of time instead of it spilling out all over in other relationships and in their work, and in their day-to-day, because they've trained themselves basically to know, I have this time and space for me. And then if they feel like going 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour of work, then they can. And sometimes it's not just journaling, it might be yoga, doing some stretching to those areas of the body that are holding on to that grief and that stress. So I do guided meditations with my clients. I highly recommend them because it gets you out of your mind, that kind of box we put up here, gets you into your body. And usually I help them kind of discover where is it stored in their body and how they can learn from it and really transform what's going on inside of them.
I love how everything comes back to you're very holistic, right? You're not just let's address this and move on. Like you're talking about movement and the touch, massage and the guided meditation. Where is my body storing this grief and how's it impacting me? So I think that is so important. Thank you for hitting on those things. And so as people are going through these steps, I loved your kind of circle activity of starting with, what was my trigger and how did I respond? And then looking at, okay, that's my natural, my automated response. That's, it's been my go-to for years and years, probably since childhood. But I get to choose something different because you're so much about empowering, right? And like we have the power to choose. And so what other tips or strategies do you have?
Yeah, I think it's important to also be aware of who we surround ourselves with when we're doing grief work. Yeah. Just in life in general too. But so not everybody's our person for grief work. It's the same as when we're like searching for a therapist or a coach. There's something about this. I've worked with a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm just so tired of trying to like search for the right therapist. And I go, well, how many have you seen? They're like, you're the second one. Okay, well, that's not really a search. So if you don't have safe people in your life that you feel like you can talk to and share these things with, and to be honest, there are people who have had the same experiences as me, but haven't done the grief work. So they're still not safe people. So don't feel like, oh, well, this person has had a miscarriage, so they know what it's like. You kind of have to see how they've navigated their own loss and grief to know, are they going to be able to sit with me as I process mine, or are they going to spill their trauma and their issues onto me? So if you don't have that and you go and you search for support, whether it be online or in person, don't be afraid to ask questions to them. We always think we need to always like tell our story and share all these things, but you can ask, what do you do for self-care? How do you work on your grief? What are the tools that you use on a day-to-day for healing? You're going to throw that counselor or coach off by asking these things, but we should be asked those things because we need to be practicing what we're preaching. So that's, be empowered to find the right support people. be okay asking them the questions before you share your story. And it is totally fine because you need to feel comfortable with them. And so support is huge to me. Part of grief is solitude. And if it's too long, it feels like isolation. And I have a good friend who recently went through a period where she really truly isolated herself. And it started with, I need some solitude. Life's a bit too much right now. And then it became isolation. And I sat down with her and I said, there was a point where it felt like you abandoned our friendship. And she said, it's so funny because I know this is my cycle and I know that I do this. And I'm aware in the moment and certain moments, like I'm doing this, but there are a lot of moments where I feel like everybody's abandoned me. And she's like, I'm creating it. And I said, it's so funny how we tell ourselves at first, I just need space. And then there's a point where we're like, everybody's left me, nobody, and everybody's being respectful of that space we requested in the sense or required. So I say, row back onto the mainland and go, hi, I'm here, people. Everything's okay. This is what I need from you. Or let's go, have coffee together. I just need to see a friendly face. So take that cocooning time, but also honor the fact that we do need people, introverted or extroverted. We need people, and make sure they're the safe people you want. And sometimes finding if they're safe or not is just asking the questions and not being afraid to ask those questions.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, like, if there is somebody close in your life? It might even be a family member, it might be a sibling or a parent or a spouse, or there might be somebody that you can't exactly just like cut out of your life tomorrow and be like, you're toxic, I'm out.
Right.
So what are some things that people can do as they're going through this work and they're identifying like, oh, this is not a safe person?
Yeah. So once you identify that, our gut response is like, get away. And like you said, it might be your partner, or it might be a parent, or somebody you can't get away from. So I've something I always teach in couples therapy is our partner isn't our everything. Like sometimes that can happen, that we have been kind of conditioned to believe like they need to serve as our everything, our best friend, our confidant, that's counselor and support, that ride or die buddy. But in reality, sometimes we're coming as unhealed people into a relationship with baggage. We're not going to be able to be that. So it's okay that that person isn't your person to process your grief work with. Find that person who is. And let's say in your home, there are unhealthy people that you're like, I just can't express myself. Then go to an office and find someone, a coach or a counselor to speak with. Have that safe space where you get out and go and talk to someone. Go to the local, you guys have the freedom, we don't have this as much, but the local library that has study rooms, and go and sit in there and do your journaling. If you're afraid of people watching what you're doing, and if you're afraid of them reading your journal, then be mindful of where you're storing it, or what you're writing, because you should be able to express what you need to, but just where those things are so that you're able to just feel safe in what you're saying and what you're doing. And it is okay that if maybe they desire to be helpful and they say the wrong things, it is okay for you to say, I'm so grateful that you desire to help, but sometimes the things you say really hurt. And that's not your intention. You should claim it for them. It's not your intention, because they'll get defensive and upset. It's not your intentions. But I'm just noticing I get hurt more, and that's what neither of us want that. So it's not that you need to change, because honestly, it'll be hard for them too. But I just know that I think these types of topics, maybe I'll just talk with my counselor, or I'll go talk with so-and-so instead. And they might get offended and hurt, but you've laid that boundary already that, hey, this topic is a little bit off limits. Let's not discuss this because it hurts when we talk about it. I remember the grief experience right after you've given birth, and maybe you go through the baby blues, and then postpartum depression hits. My sister-in-law was saying, everybody just keeps sending me these poems and quotes and things about how beautiful motherhood is, and I'm just sitting here angry all the time. And so I just started sending her funny memes, and it would just cut the anger and the frustration, because It was like the realities of motherhood made you laugh kind of thing. Sometimes we just need to tell people like their method doesn't work for me. And but this is what would work, and sometimes we don't know what that is. But there may have been one time where it's like, oh, that right there, that helped me. And you can tell people that, because we all want to learn and we all want to know how to help others. We just are conditioned to think that this is the best way to do it, make you feel grateful. So I'm going to send you things that constantly make you feel grateful, make you feel grateful, make you feel grateful. And it's like, well, if I'm not feeling good, if I'm standing at the edge of the cliff, I don't want to look at the sunrise. Like, I'm at the edge of the cliff. So sometimes we need that bridge to be built that goes, hey, you can laugh at this. Oh man, this is ridiculous. Or I'm just going to sit right beside you on this cliff and like, this just sucks and it hurts. And I'll just be right here with you, instead of feel better, everything will get better. But logically, we all know this, but sometimes we just need to have somebody who just sits with us and feels it.
Yeah, it goes back to that, we need people. We're designed and hardwired to need others, and we don't always need others to come in and solve or fix it, or have the right answer or tell us what to do. Sometimes we really just need somebody there, just their presence, their loving presence of, I'm here, I got you, let's go.
Right. And my husband is the go-to in the Myers-Briggs. He's the thinker. I'm the feeler. He wants to fix it. And even if I say to him, I just need you to hear me, you can see he's like so uncomfortable because he has so many ideas of how to fix it. And I've said to him, like, I'm so grateful that you desire to make this better for me, because you don't want me to hurt. I know you don't want me to suffer or struggle, but part of what I need to do is feel this uncomfortable so that I figure it out for myself. And once he realized it's not a responsibility I'm laying on him by sharing those things, it's his wife's an external processor. So I just need to he's gotten a lot better of just like, I can tell he kind of just has to shut parts of his brain off and be like, I'm just listening. Okay. And I've trained him at like active listening means doing this.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes he'll be like, okay, so what do you need from me? And I'll go, that's all, just needed to be heard. That's, moving on kind of thing. So recognize that if somebody's trying to fix it, it's a bit about their own uncomfortability with sitting with this, but also because they don't desire for you to struggle. And when we can come from a compassionate place of, wow, you really care, then we don't feel so like pissed off when they're, trying to push their ideas of how to fix it on. And we can claim what we need. Hey, I just need to feel this because that has to heal. And if I keep putting a Band-Aid on it, it will not heal.
Yeah. I love how much you really dive deep into the self-awareness and then communicating what it is you need. And again, that's action that we can control. That's empowering if we can embrace that.
Yeah, definitely. And another key tool I think is important is us recognizing really what self-care looks like. Unfortunately, television and Hollywood would make you think it's like bubble baths and go get your nails done. And those are all beautiful self-care practices. But there's also the things that we need to be doing for our healing. And it doesn't feel good, but it is still self-care. Or, I work with people on like work-life balance, and I talk to them about sometimes self-care is packing everything the night before, even though you want to go like sit on the couch, or cleaning up this space so that in the morning you feel like and aren't as rushed. That's self-care too. Sometimes self-care is sitting down and finally making that budget so you stop spending, overspending and going, what do I have today? What do I need this month? And self-care is planning and preparing. And it's also doing the things that our body needs, listening to the music we enjoy, dancing, movement, massage, exercise, whatever. There's lots of different layers to self-care. And if we're not doing those things, then it is truly like our cup just empties out. And then we've got nothing to give. And when you've got grief work to be doing and your cup is empty, there is no way for it to be a healthy balance. There is no way for it to be something that really gets you through the day. And so that is why, like for me, being able to journal, being able to just sit and have a quiet moment, and which is hard with 3 kids. But when there is that moment, I'm like, and I journal in front of my kids. My 7-year-old has started to bring a little notepad and a pen and started to sit next to me and write,
Oh, that's awesome.
because it's like, you got to model it.
Yes.
And you have to learn how to just like, I just don't allow myself to get into anything super serious in my writing in front of them. I'm able to do like, what am I grateful for today? What do I want to see from today? What are the things that I would like to achieve? And then just really like, hey, I'm feeling this, just a quick check-in, instead of this, like, let me write this deep, long thing, because with my kids, I'm going to have to stop, every 3 minutes in between, but I'm still journaling. I'm still getting some of that stuff out. I'm still tuning in with how I feel. I have a singing bowl that I hit, and I spin around, and I do it over their heads, and I like make it this whole big thing, and they think it's fun and they want to have it around too. And it relaxes me to hear that sound, and it makes them quiet, so it's like, like everybody's quiet, bing. And then sometimes they'll play with it, and I hear it, it soothes my body and my mind. So incorporate your self-care into your family life, and whomever and whatever is around, so that it's natural and normal. And oh, Katie's doing this, like my husband knows, like I have this like lotus engraved stone, and I hold it and I just close my eyes sometimes when we're driving. He just knows I'm meditating. Like, if the kids are quiet, either reading or taking a nap, I'm not going to be like, Katie, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? Like, I'm just going to let her be. When you incorporate it into your day to day, people recognize it and they don't interrupt it as often. It still gets interrupted, but not as often, because it's like, oh, this is that space that person needs.
Yeah, definitely. So having the self-awareness and then communicating that I now know what I need and this is what I need, and setting those boundaries, communicating those boundaries, whether it's through actions or words. Like, you might not have sat down specifically with your husband and said, when we're in the car and the kids are quiet, I'm going to get out the stone and I need you to not talk to me. Right.
Right, exactly. No.
But he just picked up on that. I do want to just really highlight too another thing that you said earlier. You've hit on it a couple of times, but it's really when somebody's response to you is you're perceiving it as triggering and hurtful and things like that, going back to, this person, their intent, their heart. So remember that they said that because they're trying to help, because they're uncomfortable, because they don't know what to say. There's something there, but like, they're not out to get you. They're not out to hurt you. They're not this mean, evil person that, all those immediate reactions and emotions may bubble to make us overreact and start pretending in our head like they were out to get us when they weren't.
Yeah, when you're that triggered and the emotion goes, it's our wounding. They have hit something in us, and I was like that inner child, that little girl that's like, no, and we react. And that is one of your signs, like, this is a grief trigger with a response that isn't about the person. And I need to work on that. I need to, hey, what you just said really hurt me. I need to go like decompress, go watch something funny for a second, and then figure out what it was, so I can, shift the fight or flight into calm. And I'll come back and talk to you. And they're probably like, what did I just say? But you create those boundaries. Yeah.
Love it. I love it. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add in?
No, I think an important piece that we all remember is how resilient and capable we are. How it's just about reminding ourselves. And because our culture has really conditioned us to feel differently about that and to believe differently, all it is a daily reminder, whether it be affirmations or having those positive people in your life to remind you and cheerlead you through, of like, yeah, I can get through this. And let me look at all the things I've already gotten through in my life and overcame. And I'm able to handle what's going on in my life right now and all the stuff from that past. and be aware of, is it time to go and seek support from somebody who isn't a friend or a family member? And trust and honor the fact that your body stores that grief. So finding ways that are unique to you that allow you to express that are important as well.
Absolutely. Well, this has been amazing. And I know people are definitely going to want to get their hands on your book and reach out and connect with you. So where can they do those things?
Yeah, so here's the book. It's The New Face of Grief. And you can find it on, thank you, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, everything online, any major online bookstore throughout the world. And it is in the US, it's $12.99 or $9.99 ebook. Hopefully next year I'll have the audiobook. And that's a slower process, as you know. It takes time to create that. You can find my website, katierössler.com. Very active on Instagram at katie.rössler. And I'm excited to share with your community. I have a 30 natural ways to support you in your grief guide that you've got the link for. And it is an amazing tool that I created after doing my year journey of really researching and studying how to support myself in my grief. Because when you lose a parent, when you lose anyone major, that doesn't, you just feel this like, what can I do? What will help this? Knowing that nothing's going to band-aid it, but there are ways to soothe some of that pain. So it has teas that are truly for helping with grief, essential oils, particular foods that we wouldn't normally think would help, but actually are quite amazing in their abilities to calm things that are going on in our bodies and in our minds. And then also habits. And I have had nutritionists and psychiatrists, like people, Australia, all around the world, who've gotten this guide and written me and been like, this is genius. Like some of the stuff you probably already know and don't realize if you use it a certain way that it helps with your grief. Wow. So it's free, and there are 30 in-depth detailed why it helps, how it helps, even with the teas and the foods and stuff. I'm like, if you're pregnant, because I was pregnant at the time, I was like, don't use this when you're pregnant, try this. So it really tries to cover all the bases of maybe talk with your doctor before trying these things. But it's a beautiful, beautiful guide of support.
That's amazing. I will definitely have to go check that out. I've recently incorporated a couple different teas in my day that, I mean, I'm only like 3 days in, and I'm way preferring this brain fog cleanse over like a cup of coffee.
Yeah. It's amazing once you figure out some of the things that your body is adjusted to and how it wasn't actually helping. That it's like, whoa, when you switch it off and you go into something that really boosts you, your energy, your clarity and stuff, it's powerful.
It is. So all of those links that were just mentioned will definitely be linked in the show notes. Everybody definitely go get your hands on the freebie, the 30 natural ways to support you in your grief guide, and that will be linked. And Katie, I like to ask all my guests if they have any daily non-negotiables.
Great question. So my daily non-negotiable, two things. I always have a cup of tea every day to have that moment of like, for me, especially because this time of year is very cold here in Germany. And also to hydrate really well, because I know that hydration, like dehydration, leads to a lot of the irritability we feel and the brain fog and the overwhelm. And just being hydrated in general helps to cleanse a lot of the stuff that our body holds on to with stress.
Love it. Love it. Any particular brands, if somebody maybe doesn't already have a tea they like, that you would recommend?
Oh, good question. So the stuff that I get is usually here in Europe. So let me think of there's the yogi teas, and I love those. I know you guys have them over there as well. So it's important that you look for teas that obviously are ethically sourced. And I always like to make sure that they're coming from the countries that they should be, that it really where these things originated versus kind of being forced to grow in certain areas. So looking that they're coming from Asia and India and Africa, depending on if it's a rooibos tea or a green tea. Those things are really important. And obviously you want to make sure that they're not only ethically being created, but also natural, and knowing what they're putting on it, on the plants themselves, and how they're blending them and things like that. Stuff that's in tea bags is usually like the powdered version of stuff, versus the actual rolled leaf is what you want. So if you can find it in that form and get a little steeper, that is the best tea that you can get. So things like that. I'm actually coming out here in Europe with a tea connoisseur on a special collection for grief healing. And so through that process, I've learned so much about how they roll the teas and how they break it up and how they create the fragrances in some of them. It's amazing, but it is something I've become a little bit nerdy about as well. You're like, you can't touch a tea bag ever again after you learn the things that you're like, oh, it's just kind of powdered version. Oh, that's not really, like, you see the leaves, but you can tell that it's kind of like not fully how it's supposed to be. So I would say just look for teas that look like good quality and have those stamps of certifications and things on them as well. That's important.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll have to look at that. The tea that I just bought is very expensive, and I did a lot of research on it. And I really like it. It's called autoimmunity, and it's designed for autoimmune program or autoimmune paleo. And I'm really working on inflammation. If anybody's watching the video, not just listening, I've been wearing my Michael Jackson glove. My Fitbit's under there. That's the big bulge. But my wrist, I'm just working so much. And so I really need to work on the ergonomic setup of my workspace, but then just seeing if that will help and stuff. So I got a couple of those, and it's loose leaf. And so I had to get the little diffusers, and but I really like them, and there's no additives. It's all it's free of everything. It's free, it's organic, it's gluten-free, dairy-free, all the things. And not that some of those things would typically be in a tea, but
well, you never know where it's being processed, to be honest. You never know what it's picked up. So yeah.
So, yeah, I love it. So I may too be joining you on the tea nerd wagon. Oh, goodness. Well, it's been so delightful connecting with you. We have similar upbringings of the military and living in Europe as we were growing up. However, I did briefly marry someone in the Air Force, but we divorced quickly, which is what launched into my journey here. But yeah, so I hope to get back overseas. It just will not be related to military, as is yours is not either. You married a German. So that's awesome. Just the things, how life works out. You maybe would not have been as open to even having a conversation with your current husband had you not had those childhood experiences. And then moving to Germany, had you never been there, had you that could have been a big barrier for you.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Katie, for joining and sharing. Anyone listening, if you got value out of this episode, please share it with someone that you think would also benefit from it. And leaving a podcast review is so very much appreciated. And you can quickly and easily leave reviews from any device by going to ratethispodcast.com/Khalil. That's CALYL for Create a Life You Love. That'll be linked. And if you find yourself on a transformation journey, be sure to check out the free transformation action plan. You just answer a few simple questions, and then you will receive detailed, personalized results with the top 3 things that you can implement to build momentum in your journey today. And that's all for today. Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, everyone. Enjoy the journey. Thank you for listening to the Create a Life You Love podcast. I would love to hear from you about your biggest takeaways. Share them with me on Facebook or Instagram at Create a Life You Love Coaching. If you love this podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. That's it for now. Enjoy the journey.